You're listening to Leading Up with Udemy. This podcast is your guide to developing your skills as an emerging or seasoned leader. I'm Alan Todd, your host and the Vice President of Leadership Development at Udemy. Together, we can work, lead, and live differently to create a better world. I was super excited to have Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford's Graduate School of Business on the podcast this week. I think Jeffrey Pfeffer is one of the most unconventional leadership scholars in the world. His advice is counterintuitive, but powerful, always rooted in theory and grounded in evidence-based practice.
I basically do research and writing and teaching about subjects that have two characteristics. Number one, they are important, and number two, nobody else will touch them. Elizabeth Kanner in 1979 wrote an article that said power is the organization's last dirty word. Could talk about money, talk about sex, can't talk about power. And that's true for much of the stuff I've written about. So I try to find the white space in management thought and to do my best to fill it.
This week, I'm speaking with legendary management expert and author Jeffrey Pfeffer. Dr. Pfeffer is a professor of organizational behavior at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he has taught since 1979. He has degrees from Carnegie Mellon and Stanford, and he's taught all over the world, including for the last 14 years as a visiting professor at ESA Business School in Barcelona. He's considered by those in his field to be one of the great management thinkers of our time. He's won achievement awards from the Academy of Management and Thinkers 50, among many others. Jeffrey has written over a dozen books on the subject of management, and his latest, 7 Rules of Power, is a primer on how to use your own power to get things done. Jeffrey, welcome to the podcast.
Alan, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. So I have a lot of things to ask you, but I'm going to start with just your opinion on the leadership development industry. So you said in Leadership BS that where medicine was a century ago, we're there now selling snake oil. Now, that was a while ago, so I'm wondering, is the leadership industry still largely snake oil?
Yes, I think the leadership industry, by almost every objective measure, has failed and continues to fail. And I think we're not doing a very good job because a lot of leadership training focuses on the world that we wish existed as opposed to the realities of actual human behavior. So there's things about you ought to be authentic and you ought to be modest and you ought to be many things. But, would you use modest to describe Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or many of the other major leaders of the time? And of course, the answer to that is no. My friend Adam Grant wrote a fabulous New York Times article many years ago entitled, "Unless You're Oprah, Be Yourself" is terrible advice. And so we've put out stuff that is not very useful and is not very realistic. It is aspirational. And we've avoided, for the most part, teaching people stuff that they need. So to give you a very short example, some years ago, I did a conference at Half Moon Bay, near where I live, to a bunch of chief learning officers. And I said, raise your hand if you have issues with retaining your high potentials. And every hand went up. And I said, leave your hand up if one of the reasons why you have problems with high potentials is that their careers flame out because they cannot master the political dynamics of work. Because, of course, as you rise up in an organization, your ability to get things done depends upon your ability to interact and influence other people. And every hand stays up. And then I said, well, keep your hand up if you do training on power and influence. And every hand went down. And so that is, I think, the summary of the leadership industry, that if you are going to be in an interdependent situation, which is what organizations are, if you and I are working together, the only way I'm going to be able to get my job done is to figure out how to work with you and influence you and vice versa so that we can collaboratively accomplish something. And we basically do no training in that because that's called influence, and people don't want to train on influence. We want to train on authenticity.
So that's an interesting point. Every company says they want collaboration and they have courses on it, they teach it, they train it. Is there a conflict between collaboration and power?
No, I think the interpersonal influence is how you get things done. People have different perspectives because they have different key performance indicators and different things they're responsible for. People have different information because what the CFO sees is not what necessarily the head of engineering sees or the head of marketing. So you have a particular disciplinary perspective. You have a particular set of key performance indicators, and they don't all align perfectly. And so we see differences of opinion. It's part of all human relationships. If you have a significant other, and you were like me when I was married to Kathleen, who's unfortunately now deceased, when we decided which movie to watch, I wanted to see, angst-ridden movies, and she wanted to see rom-coms. Disagreement is part of life. It is why we have more than one person in an organization. We have different people with different perspectives. And then the question becomes, how do you move forward? And you move forward by mastering the tools of influence so that you can get things done. So this is really about getting things done.
Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about power. This is your line, and you've repeated it often. If power is to be used for good, good people must know and use the tools of power. So let's start with a good example. How do people use power for good, and how do they use it for bad?
So I'll give you a wonderful example. I have a dear friend who I think I talk about in 7 Rules of Power, Laura Esserman, who is a very accomplished breast cancer surgeon, but she's gone way beyond breast cancer to try to change the drug development process through something called I Spy, and to change, how care is delivered at UC San Francisco, which is where she teaches and provides her medical care. So when she arrived at UC San Francisco and was placed in charge of the Carol Frank Buck Breast Care Center, she had a vision. And the vision was that a woman would arrive in the morning with a suspicious lump referred by her physician, and she would leave at the end of the day with a treatment plan. Not the typical, we're going to send you out for a mammogram. 2 or 3 or 4 days later, that'll get interpreted. And then if the mammogram looks bad, you come in for a biopsy, and then we're going to figure that out. And then, eventually you'll wind up with a treatment plan. No, her vision was going to come in and leave at the end of the day with every test performed and evaluated within 1 day. Now, she had no formal authority over most of the departments involved in this. She was not in charge of radiology. She was not in charge of pharmacology, but she learned the rules of power because she was a student of mine, mustered those rules of power. And when she was told there was no possible way for her to do this, of course, that has inspired her to figure out exactly how to do it. And so today, if you go to UC San Francisco, you will enter in the morning with a suspicious lump and leave at the end of the day with a treatment plan, which, needless to say, has brought a lot of business to the University of California, San Francisco. And by the way, has now become a model for other organizations as well. But in order to do this, she had to build political skill and political influence. In 2016, she was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. That is using power for good. How do I change the medical care system? How do I change the drug development system in a way so it doesn't take 10 years and $1 billion to build a drug? How do I provide patient-centered care? All of these things are, basically using power and influence to get people aligned and to get things accomplished. So that's using power for good. Using power for bad is basically doing things that are much more selfishly oriented, that are all about you, and that really do not consider the well-being of the other people. And then you see hundreds of thousands of examples of that every day in business and politics. So to take a simple example, when I look at the U.S. House of Representatives, I see many people who are more interested in being on TV than they are on solving any problems for the American people. They want to have their moment in the sun. They want to be provocative. They want to be outrageous. They want to be anything except effective legislators. And so that, I would say, is using power for bad.
Well, and there's something you said somewhere. It was about personality types. What did you call it? The dark triad. The dark triad traits predict leader emergence, and those traits harm organizations and people: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So showing those things apparently gets you promoted. Well, what's that all about?
Yeah, well, when Donald Trump came down the escalator in 2015, I wrote a column for Fortune, because I was still writing for Fortune in those days, in which I said Donald Trump has the leadership characteristics that we claim we don't want, but invariably hire for. And that is in fact right. We are attracted to these grandiose narcissists. They're interesting, they stand out. There are many issues with Donald Trump, but to me, the biggest issue is that it is not clear to me that he cares about anything or anybody except himself. And that, I think, is often true for CEOs as well. So to take my favorite example, when Stan O'Neill ran Merrill Lynch, he drove Merrill Lynch into the ground. Stan O'Neill left with $160 million. Was Stan O'Neill effective? If you're Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill, Stan O'Neill was very effective. If you were some Merrill Lynch employee during the financial crisis, not so much. You see this with CEOs all the time, where they are concerned mostly only about their own well-being, their own wealth, and apparently too much is never enough. The ratio between CEO and frontline pay has gone from 20 or 30 or 50 to 1 to now well over 300 to 1. I think it goes basically back to the fundamental issue of who are you using your power for? Are you using it only for yourself, or are you using it to try to make things better for other people?
So let's move on to the 7 rules, and let's assume we're talking now to an emerging leader, a future leader, somebody that might be a team leader today. I think we've set a good foundation for why it matters. So let's get right to rule number 1, get out of your own way.
So there is a phrase that some of your listeners may have heard, which is called impostor syndrome. So one of the ways in which we get on our own way is we believe that somehow we've arrived in our role by accident, or we are the admissions mistake or the hiring mistake, and we don't deserve to be there. And so therefore, we are reluctant to step into, or to use Sheryl Sandberg's phrase, lean into the role and the responsibility that we've been given. I think that's one way in which people get in their own way. The other way in which people get in their own way is that they are trying to optimize being liked. They're trying to optimize being popular. But of course, you are given responsibility to get things done. And oftentimes when you need to get things done, you're not going to do things that everybody is going to like. We worry too much about what everybody else is thinking about us and whether everybody likes everything we're doing. I think that is another way in which we get in our own way. And we also, and oftentimes, carry around self-descriptions that disempower us. I have a former student named Christine who comes to see me. She said, I work in this organization. I have a peer who's gone to our common boss and has said that I ought to report to him, which of course was a good move because then he could take credit for her good work. And she says, we need to figure out what I can do. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you the first thing we can do. I said, you've been in this office maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And what I've heard numerous times is that you're the only woman in this collection of people. You are the youngest and the person with the least seniority in the organization. Those are 3 descriptors, all of which, unfortunately, disempower you. I said, let me give you 3 other adjectives. You are the only person in this group of people, your 3 peers and your common boss, who's gone to an elite business school. She graduated from Stanford. The only person who has your level of analytical chops, because in addition to graduating from Stanford, she had worked at McKinsey. And I said, and by the way, you're the person who's run the project that has made the most money. And she sits up a little straighter in her chair. And she said, well, that's actually right. I said, okay, Christine, we got 6 adjectives. You decide which 3 you want to carry around. You want to carry around, I'm the youngest, I'm the least senior. Or you want to carry around, I have run the project that's made the most money, and I'm the most analytically skilled. And so we disempower ourselves by how we describe ourselves.
So let's take that further. Assume we're lower in the ranks of the hierarchy. Rule 2, you tell us to break the rules. How do we do that without getting fired?
Well, in the words of my dear friend Laura Esserman, who made up the rules in the first place. And some of the rules really don't stand us. And rules are the rules. They're also social conventions. So there's a social convention, particularly prevalent in Western societies, that says you don't ask for help. You don't ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. You don't get upgraded in the hotel room if you don't ask for it. You, by the way, don't get career opportunities if you do not tell your colleagues what your ambitions are and what you're trying to achieve. So, I think one of the rules that you need to break is, of course, the rule about being completely self-sufficient and not asking. But there are many rules. The example that I use in 7 Rules of Power is all social change comes only when people break with social convention and the rules. When Rosa Parks did not sit in the back of the bus, when the African Americans in the civil rights movement insisted on sitting in at the counters at Woolworths, that's the only way that social change occurs. Nelson Mandela became a father of South Africa while he was in prison. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail was written, obviously, when he was in a Birmingham jail. The only way anything ever changes is by having people with the courage and the skill to challenge the status quo. If I said to you, in business strategy, you need to break the rules, that's obviously clear. Southwest Airlines broke the rule that said you had to fly hub and spoke. Whole Foods Market broke the rule that said the objective of a grocery store chain was to minimize their product costs. Whole Foods understood that taste differed depending upon whether you were in Boston, Austin, or San Francisco, and that people would pay more for food they wanted to eat. So therefore, the issue wasn't minimizing costs, it was maximizing food to fit local people's tastes. In strategy, we often break the rules. I think we need to break the rules as people in organizations because innovation is by almost definition involved with rule breaking. I think early on in your career, it's very important. If you're going to stand out, you have to do something to stand out. And that often means going against conventional wisdom.
Yeah, so defying conventional wisdom, breaking the rules. So if we take that, I'm going to skip one and we'll come back to it, but let's just talk about building a powerful brand. If that's part of describing myself, what are the keys to building a powerful brand and why are we afraid to do it?
Well, I'm not sure we're afraid to do it, but I think we don't think about doing it. Building a powerful brand involves trying to figure out what is unique about you. Building a brand is a short statement that says, this is how and why I got to where I am, and this is what makes me particularly suited to doing the job that I'm either doing or aspire to do. And you want to market yourself, just as Coca-Cola markets itself and Mercedes-Benz markets itself and products market themselves. You need to market yourself as well. The idea that somehow your boss or your boss's boss or somebody in the organization is going to find you and know you and see all of your qualities is possible, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. And so you need to have a marketing campaign so that people know what your accomplishments are, so that people know what your skills are. But I don't necessarily want to rely on you to figure this out. I want to help you figure it out by giving you information that suggests that this is what I've done and this is what my skill level is, as opposed to relying on random chance.
So you have to get out there. You have to take credit for your work. You have to tell your story. You have to pick the right adjectives. You have to be willing to work out on the fringes in unconventional ways. That's where we are so far.
Yep.
I want to get to the next one. So we've had a lot of people on the podcast. We've had a lot of CLOs and we've also had a lot of leadership scholars and thinkers. And the one thing on the learning leader side, I asked them just as practitioners, what got you to the top of an organization over a bunch of years? And networking relentlessly is a common theme that they all said was powerful. And you've written about it. And this is another one. It's like taking credit for your own work. There are people that think this is kind of things we don't do in polite society. So talk about networking relentlessly. Why don't we do it more and better and treat it as crucial as it is?
Well, I think why we don't do it, I think number one, people forget, or they say, I don't have the time to do it. You know, when I first started working with, and not as a formal coach, but as an informal advisor to my friend Laura Esserman, she said, I'm busy. I don't have time to go schmooze, was the word she used. And I said, you actually need to schmooze, because in order to get done what you need to get done, you have to have other people on your side, and you have to build personal relationships and connections with those people. So if leadership is getting things done through other people, which is often how it's defined, the more other people you know and are connected to, the more you're going to be able to get done. And by the way, there are many roles which are completely networking roles. So what does a venture capitalist do? A venture capitalist connects people with business ideas with people with money to invest. What does a real estate agent do? They connect buyers and sellers. There are jobs in this world which are basically 100% about connecting people. That's what networking is. Networking is connecting people who could benefit from knowing each other, connecting them with and to each other so that they can, in fact, do better through their mutual connection. Taking people who need knowledge of a certain kind with people who have knowledge of that kind. Connecting people who need certain skills with people with those skills. So life is about networking. We don't do it because I think we spend too much time thinking about our own work. I mean, in school, collaboration is called cheating. So we begin by saying we need to be completely self-reliant. We don't want to reach out to other people for their help, because literally in school that is called cheating. And so we are trained from a very early age to be completely independent and self-reliant. But as you arrive in the workplace and have other people whose contributions and knowledge and skills and collaboration are necessary for you to be effective in your job, you have to get out of this idea that your job is to sit at your desk all day. Your job is, in fact, to walk the halls and to know and meet the people who can help you get your job and get your work done.
Yeah, I love the connection to brokers, right? Real estate, stock, venture capital. I think that's an interesting way. And I think you even said like search firms, executive search, like there's something to be said about they create enormous value. And we should think about ourselves and our roles and our jobs and our companies as maybe being a broker as a way to help create value for other people and build that network. Yep. So let's get to rule 3, Jeffrey, appear powerful. Tell me more. What do I have to do to have a more powerful appearance?
I think, number one, you need to understand that we respond a lot to how people look. Secondly, to how they sound, and by far the least important to the content of what they say. So I think you want to show up in a powerful fashion. And that involves many, many techniques around body language. Amy Cuddy has a TED Talk based on her book Presence, which is I think the second or third most downloaded TED Talk in history. And so I recommend that people look at that. My colleague, Deborah Grunfeld, has written a book called Acting with Power. She also has a thing on YouTube in which she talks about how to show up in a powerful fashion. I highly recommend that. It involves an expansive posture with your arms spread. It involves taking up space, both physically and verbally. It involves making eye contact, obviously. If you don't make eye contact, people think you're somehow lying or deceptive. It involves gently touching people, perhaps on the shoulder or the wrist. These are all things for projecting power. It involves interrupting rather than permitting other people to interrupt you. I think that's another aspect of showing up in a powerful fashion. It's using powerful language. I think you want to use declarative sentences. You don't want to end your sentence by raising your voice, which makes a declarative sentence sound like a question. So there are a number of things that you can do to show up in a powerful fashion.
Is there an unwarranted self-confidence? Can we ever get too much hubris in a way that it backfires?
Confidence is confused with competence. You want to speak in a confident way. Can you go too far in that direction? You can go too far in everything. You can network probably too much. Spend all your time networking and no time doing your job. But in general, most people err on the downside. They don't spend enough time on social relationships. They don't show up with enough confidence. They don't think of themselves as the competent individual that they probably are. So I would not worry too much about going too far.
Yep. And so let's keep going then. How about using our power? How do we put it to use if we start to appear powerful, break the rules?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that people see power as you'd see, water in a glass. The more the water you drink out of the glass, the less water is left. But power is not that at all. The more you use your power to get things done, the more power you have. In the sense that, why would I want to work with you? Well, I want to work with you because I see that you are successful. I see that you are able to accomplish things. I see that you're able to make projects move ahead. So the more you are able to use your power and the more things, therefore, you are able to get done, the easier it will be to attract resources and human resources or talent, because people want to work with other people who they see as being successful and effective. So if you say, well, I've been put into this leadership role, but I don't want to actually act like a leader, you probably aren't going to be in that leadership role for very long, because you are given a leadership role, you were given responsibility to get things done. And so therefore you need to lean into the influence that you have. You need to make things happen. So, the more successful you are, the easier it is to continue to be successful because you get the talent and resources that will permit you to be successful. The less you use your power and the less you get done and the less successful you are, the fewer resources you're going to have, the fewer talented people you're going to have who want to work with you.
Yep. I want to get to Rule 7, success excuses almost everything. You call it the most important rule of all. Tell us why.
Well, I think the two rules that are most important is, number one, get out of your own way, and then Rule 7. So one of the things that I ran into in my teaching, and I teach an elective called The Path to Power, and I teach in our lead course, which is our online course at Stanford, class called Building Power to Lead. And what I would find is that people were reluctant to do many of the things I talked about because they say, oh my goodness, it's going to backfire. There's going to be a backlash. People are not going to like me or whatever. And my observation is that once you have power, money, and success, people will forgive what you did to get there. A perfect example would be Donald Trump. There were many never Trumpers, including Lindsey Graham. Once Donald Trump became president, Lindsey Graham became a big supporter of his. And, Lindsey Graham said, look, he became president. I want to be relevant, and therefore I have to make my peace with him. People, once you have a ton of money, people will, in fact, excuse you. David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center. If you read the biographies of David Geffen, he's not the most pleasant person in the world. Nobody cares. Same with Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone, etc. Once you have money, once you have power, once you have success, people will come to accommodate that because people want to be close to power. And so we are attracted to power, and we are attracted to people who are similar to ourselves. And once you understand that, it helps us, I think, understand a lot about organizational and social life.
Yeah, and I like how you have always framed it, is that you need to learn this if you're going to use it for good. You have to understand it to know that what it is and how it's being used.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I sometimes tell people if change were going to happen easily, it would have happened already. The reason why the current U.S. health insurance system is screwed up is that one person's waste is somebody else's business model. There are people who benefit from everything, even the most perverse things or the most difficult things in the world. So if you are going to change the world for the better, you're probably going to need influence in order to accomplish it.
So, Jeffrey, as we wrap up here, one question that I ask everyone, what are you curious about and learning now?
I have become interested in the U.S. healthcare system. Not only the fact that organizations are oftentimes physically and behaviorally unhealthy places, but also the fact that the U.S. healthcare system is extraordinarily screwed up. We spend by far the most on health of any industrialized country on a per capita basis as a percentage of GDP, and our health outcomes are awful. So we have a health system which costs too much and does too little. And so I am curious about why that is and how to fix it. And so that is what I'm currently working on.
And I assume we can trust that you'll take a counterintuitive point of view and cut through the conventional wisdom that has gotten us to where we are. Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Alan, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks again to Jeffrey Pfeffer for joining us today. Follow Leading Up, a podcast from Udemy Business, wherever you find your podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode to help you level up your leadership skills. Follow the show so you never miss a new episode. And if you like the show, leave a rating or a review. We love the feedback, and it really helps us to find new listeners. To learn more about Leading Up or how Udemy can help you develop leaders at scale and move business forward, visit business.udemy.com. The Leading Up podcast is produced in partnership with Pod People. Our original theme is by Soundboard.